And those things you're mentioning.
Good morning. Welcome to Liberty Forum. We are sponsored by Eagle Forum. I am Barbara Petty, Vice Chairman, and Kathy Young is our Chairman. We welcome all of you in attendance today. Special welcome to our United States Senate candidates on the stand. And our Utah Attorney General candidates will be coming a little later. A special welcome also to Rob Axon, who is the Utah State Republican Party Chairman, who will be the moderator for the Senate, and Gail Ruzicka, who will be the moderator for the Attorney General discussion. I think it would be good if all of you moved as close as you could. This theater is pretty big and there's plenty of seats. We want you to be able to hear. We thank you all for attendance, especially the delegates. And we will now have an opening prayer by Vince Newmeyer.
Our Heavenly Father, we humbly meet this day to decide our future. The future of our state, the future of our nation. We implore thy guidance and blessing to be upon us, to be upon those who will participate. We're grateful for the Constitution that has established a framework by which freedom can flourish, liberty and justice can exist. We pray at this time as we begin this meeting that we will have discernment from thee, discernment of those who will best carry that banner, that heavenly banner of our Constitution which thou hast inspired, and give us discernment to see those who may not have the focus and the vision that our founders had, and which we need to maintain in order to enjoy a continuance of this liberty. Now we ask thy blessings to be upon this, and we pray that there will be civility, respect, and honor for all. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. And now we'll have a pledge by Craig Thorne.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I now turn the meeting over to Rob Axon, who's the moderator.
Thank you very much. As we get started, by a show of hands, who in the room is a state delegate? Please raise your hand. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, kudos to all of you, state delegates, both in attendance here in the room and those that are watching it through the streaming services. We appreciate all of our state delegates. We have 4,030 state delegates across the entire state of Utah. And all of these candidates up at the front of the room can tell you, you delegates have been doing a fantastic job of keeping them on their toes, earning their time, and also earning their respect as you engage with questions and ideas and share the topics that are most important to you in your respective communities. So on behalf of the State Republican Party, just know how much we appreciate your willingness to serve as state delegates for a 2-year term and to engage in this process. It's a significant process that we benefit here in Utah from, of having these ideas. Again, 29 counties across the state, there's different issues that are important to different communities, while of course having general issues that are applicable to the entire state and the entire country, and it's important to get that nuanced perspective of all of those. So thank you again, state delegates. Also, there's a gentleman who was in the race who dropped out, Clark White. I'm sure many of you have met Clark or heard from him as state delegates. His wife unfortunately passed away a couple of days ago, and that necessitated his need to step away from the race. And so I would ask that we keep Clark White and his 2 sons in our prayers, and make sure that as Utahns we step forward to support people in their challenging times, and especially an unforeseen tragedy as that is. And should anybody be so interested, I know there is a support fund in lieu of flowers that has been requested and made notice at America First Credit Union in the name of him and his 2 sons, the older of which has cerebral palsy. So I'm sure there's some needs that they have there. But beyond that, of course, I am a big believer in the power of prayer. I am personally a believer, as I know many of you, if not most of you are, in the power of a being and a supreme being who loves us, who is our Father in heaven and cares about us, and will bless and support Clark in this challenging time. So now moving on to the purpose of our being here today. It's these wonderful candidates. And their commitment to our state and commitment to our party, and most importantly, commitment to our country. They each have a wealth of experience and ideas that you have been able to get to know and to see. Because of that, we have decided to forego introductory statements and closing statements. We are just going to be doing questions today. And we are starting at the position closest to me, so we will be starting with Brad Wilson, and we'll be making our way down. Every candidate will have the opportunity to answer every question. So we will work our way down, and then the second question will be asked by the second person, so on and so forth. They'll be, or it's not asked, but they will be answering the question first. So Brad, to you first with our first question, and the question is, would you get rid of the Patriot Act? Why or why not? Keep tapping on that until we get that figured out. And real quick, while he figures this out, I forgot to mention, right here on the front row is Judy. Judy, do you mind raising your hand for everybody? So candidates, do you all see Judy right there in the center of the front row? She will be the one who is giving you the time cards. So each question and each candidate will have 1 minute to answer your question. You will have a 30-second mark, and then at the 1 minute mark, there will be a stop sign and a lovely chime, I'm told, that will be played, and it will signify to you that it's time to wrap up. I will allow you to wrap up your thought in 1 or 2 brief sentences, but we won't have time to go beyond that.
This mic is working, but it might...
Don't count it on his time.
Yeah, if that one can... Okay, I think we'll... And Brad, again, so your time has not started, don't worry. I'll ask the question one more time. So this first question for all candidates is, would you get rid of the Patriot Act? Why or why not?
Well, first of all, that works. That's amazing. So, first of all, thank you, Gail. Thank you, everyone, for putting this together. It's great to be back here. It seems like we were just here a few weeks ago doing something like this, right? And appreciate all of you that are state delegates. I know it's a big sacrifice. I know it's a lot of work, but it's really important work. So thank you very much. In terms of the Patriot Act, in terms of FISA, which is going to be discussed over the next week or two, we all understand the value and the importance of the Constitution. It's to protect us from a federal government that's intrusive, a federal government that, wow, that goes fast, a federal government that has the ability to wade in and do things and cause difficulty in our lives. And I think both with the Patriot Act and the discussion that's happening this month, there are problematic elements to both. And we know that the federal government at times is spying on American citizens. These types of things are not acceptable. I hope Congress does the right thing next week and doesn't renew FISA the way that it is currently outlined. Wow, that's a minute? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And Brian is not here, so we will immediately go on to Jason.
Hi, yes. Thank you, Gail, and thank you for all the delegates and everyone in attendance and for the forum for putting this together. I agree with Brad in that the Constitution is pretty clear. The overriding principles of the Constitution that made it work is it provides life, liberty, property, and it gives us freedom. The Patriot Act, in the ways that it infringes upon that, becomes unconstitutional and un-American. And with things like FISA 702, it becomes, quite frankly, fascist. Those that aren't familiar with FISA 702, it's saying that as information is gathered, as you're looking at people who are not American and who are people of interest that we need to be protected from, as we're gathering information on them, if we incidentally gather information on Americans, that it can be used. And that's even without a warrant from a judge. So that is against everything that we believe as Americans. FISA 702 should not be renewed in its current form. And it's because it's un-American. So we need to be following the Constitution. That's our safe harbor.
Thank you. Carolyn.
I agree with everything, including the thanks to all of you for being delegates and being here. It's clear we saw this during the Trump election, right? That we had spying that was taking place by the previous administration on Trump's people, or by, excuse me, not the previous administration, but by the administrative state that has been referred to as a deep state. It wasn't that many years ago when I thought that was hyperbole. It is not hyperbole, clearly. And we know that through FISA, this very thing was occurring where people could be targeted, American citizens could be targeted, and we literally had members of Trump's team who were specifically being targeted through this type of authorization. We have the Constitution for a reason. I served a mission in a country that was just released from the totalitarian hold of the Soviet government. It is clear what happens in those situations, and if we do not understand the principle, we will not push back when it is violated just a little. And we are to a place now where those principles that protect us constitutionally are being violated on every level.
Brent.
Hi. This is just another example of a government program that starts out with good intentions and ends poorly. The intentions, of course, initially were to be able to protect the homeland after 9/11. We needed that, and there are a lot of things that are happening in homeland security that are important. But they established these FISA courts, and a lot of you may not know, but we actually had one of our federal district court judges here who sat on the FISA court by designation. He's since passed away, but I remember talking to him about that, because they're secret courts. They're not like our regular courts where you have an adversarial system where someone can represent the other side and make sure that there are fair things happening. And not surprisingly, virtually every subpoena, every permission to wiretap, to do those kind of things was accepted and allowed. We can't have that in America, and so we go from having a good program that was going to protect the homeland to one that started to spy on us and to affect our personal rights, and that needs to stop.
Trent.
Well, thank you all for putting this on, and definitely to all the state delegates. I'm so grateful for you and for your service. As Rob mentioned, it's a 2-year commitment, and as a convention-only candidate, I have also pledged that I want this to survive past convention. For these 2 years, be engaged in monthly town halls, and I am 100% committed to that. I think it's going to strengthen our caucus and convention system. As with respect to the Patriot Act, absolutely would repeal it. I think its implementation and authorization of FISA back in 2008 have been incredibly problematic. Fourth Amendment issues for sure. I mean, we need to be secure in our papers, persons, and effects, and the impact that we have with respect to warrantless searches, it's very, very concerning. I mean, what was most concerning to me is to see our great Senator Mike Lee in an oversight committee speaking with Christopher Wray of the FBI. And he sat there just with a smirk on his face. He said, we've got examples of over 200,000 times where you have conducted warrantless spying of Americans, sir. What is your process? And he wouldn't even say. So we've got to get rid of, we got to get rid of this. We got to have bureaucrats that are actually accountable to the folks that we, the people, elect.
Chandler.
Usually I like the word patriot, And usually lately it's the Democrats who get a little bit up in arms when we say something like patriot. But in this case, yeah, government always has the tendency to creep, grow. So what started out as a good thing to protect us against foreign nations has now been abused to become something that can be used for our own government to violate our constitutional rights. That's why I'm running to make sure that we push back against an expanding federal government. We really need the power to stay at a local level, because it's at a local level where we know what our problems are, we know what solutions are most effective. I'm running from a rural area, Orangeville, which is down by Price, if you know it. It's a great small town. And in that space, I saw a headline recently that said that the rural voice is the biggest threat to American democracy. That's not a statement I agree with. I think the biggest threat to American democracy is a socialist agenda that moves us more and more toward the government doing more and more for us, taking more and more from us to do it, and infringing on our constitutional rights.
Jeremy.
Thank you. Well, the Patriot Act was a response to the attack on 9/11. And that response, unfortunately, was to create more bureaucracy. They created the Homeland Security, which oversees a bunch of other agencies, and it made us a less lean fighting machine against our enemies. It also created a system where we have to take our shoes off and stand in line like sheep going through a pen to get on an airplane. In Israel, they don't do that. They figure the airline companies are most motivated to protect themselves from acts of terror, and it works better. They tested the system we have in America, and people are able to get through it pretty much at will. But we go through the theater of making us feel safer and line up and give us our liberties. The FISA court is also greatly misused. I think when someone is asked to be investigated by the FISA court, their chances are just 1 in 4,000 that FISA will say no. So it's greatly abused, and I just want to see less government rather than more, leaner government rather than an inefficient, fat government like me. Thank you.
Josh.
Well, I'll say to start, I'm a little disturbed to hear news of one of our fellow candidates having lost his wife in the last week. I don't know what happened there, but gosh, that's hard news to hear right before answering these questions. But I think that some of the other candidates have made some great points already on this, that unreasonable search and seizure, unwarranted search, we've had some problems in our executive branch in the last couple of years. It's been subjective. We've had some bias in some of our agencies, and I think it needs to be investigated. I'm one who favors overturning the Patriot Act and looking at new avenues. We've got a bit of a problem with how much they've been eavesdropping on our own people without reasonable cause. So that's my position on that.
Thank you, candidates. So we will move to the second question. I've been told that Brian is on his way. We will let him jump in as soon as he gets here, but we will not go backwards to let him answer questions that he doesn't have or what he wasn't here for. So we're going to be going to you, Jason, for this next question. And the question is, when you say you will fight for Utah, what does that mean, and how does that translate into getting good things done?
Well, thank you, first of all, but getting good things done is I like that phrase better than getting things done. Because a lot of times I think when people say getting things done, we're talking about Mitch McConnell, which as near as I can tell, always getting done is passing the Democrats' agenda. So when it comes to the state of Utah, there's several things that we can work on. But I also want to say that a lot of times voting against bad legislation is the best thing a U.S. Senator can do to get good things done. And there are a lot of things that need to be voted against in the Senate, and especially with how liberal this presidency's been. But how about talking about passing Senator Mike Lee's REINS Act? That's a phenomenal piece of legislation that takes away power from the bureaucracy. How about regulating federal regulators, not regulating them, term limiting them? Why are we not talking about term limiting federal regulators? How about helping pass Senator Mike Lee's Housing Act? How about talking about lands issues and returning some of the 65 to 67% of the land of Utah the federal government owns? It's not right. There's a lot of Utah issues that we can go fight for.
Carolyn.
So in my time working in politics, this was my consistent refrain. And now it has become this because the numbers have changed. We are $34.5 trillion worth of getting things done debt. And it's time to stop that. We need, exactly as this question alludes to, we need to be getting the right things done, which are the difficult things. Because we are so distracted in the raiding of the Treasury, that is the bread and circuses that are keeping the people calm and fat and happy. I don't need to point it to you, Jeremy, but you said it. And that truly, that has become a distraction from the important things and the difficult things. And that has created a situation where we've given the people we elect an excuse to not do those difficult things that really are the urgent things. My entire life we've talked about, asked the question, how long can we kick the can down the road? We have kicked it to the end of the road. It is a dead end. There's a cliff on the other side, and we have 1 foot hanging over the side of the cliff. So it is things like massive reform. I have no time for the details.
You know, getting things done depends on the thing that's getting done. There are things like the border that we can shut that down immediately. There are things like our budget problems, which we can stop excessive spending immediately. But I noticed the Eagle Forum is one of the co-sponsors of this. Sometimes getting things good done take a long time, and it takes winning the hearts, minds, and souls of people. That's one of the things I've learned. Many of you have learned that I spent many years as a director of the Federalist Society. We saw a problem when I got out of law school with judges who were out of control doing what they called equity and not actually interpreting the laws as required in the Constitution. So that wasn't a get things done, just like the Eagle Forum could be done overnight. That was a get things done that I spent 36 years working when I was working for President Reagan, President Bush, and also on my own, working through the Federal Society to change the judiciary and get us to where we now are with a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. Sometimes getting things done is being dogged, being conservative, doing it for a long time to make sure things actually change. Thank you.
I appreciate the question. Getting the right things done is the most important thing we can do. And what is that? I mean, we've got to close the border. Number one, it's going to have a huge impact for Utahns. I see over 150,000 active cases that ICE is working here within just our own state. That's incredibly problematic and disruptive to the state. We've got to stop printing money. We've got to go ahead and balance the budget. Those things are going to have huge, enormous impacts to Utahns. We need to unleash energy dominance, and ensure that we get back to where we were under President Trump, less than $2 a gallon gasoline. With those two things, with lowering the cost of energy and stop printing money, guess what? Inflation isn't going to be roaring its ugly head the way it has been, where it's costing an extra $9,000, $10,000 for average Utah families. Hey, these are things that we can get done, but it's going to take people that are America first and they're constitutional conservatives. That's why when Senator Tommy Tuberville was out here endorsing my candidacy, he said, look, Trent supports President Trump. He's going to join our executive steering committee. That's only 18 right now. That's the problem. We got to have a majority within our own caucus, because we can't just elect people with R's next to their name. They've got to be America first, constitutional conservatives. They're going to go ahead and move this agenda forward.
Getting good things done can often mean not doing bad things, getting power back into power back into people's hands. So I grew up in coal country, Carbon and Emery County. My grandpa was a coal miner in the area, and it used to be that we had 30 mines and 7 federal mine regulators. Now we have 30 mine regulators and 7 mines. And that's the story of government, that's the story of the federal government. Growth, growth, growth. We need to look at getting back to the Constitution. Is this something that the government should be doing in the first place? I often have people say to me, well, what are you going to do as Senator for me? And my response, very candid, is as little as possible according to the Constitution. I want to get back to government so that we can cut back on what the government does for us, and we can get power back to the people so that we can take care of ourselves. That's the strength of America. It's in our people. It's not in a bloated federal government that incurs $34 trillion of debt to do stuff for us. It's in a government that takes only what's necessary so that we can keep our money in our pockets and pursue our innovations, our dreams, and accomplish the things that make America strong and great.
Well, my approach is a bit different from the other candidates. I think we need to restore the Constitution so it functions as originally intended. This approach of just trying to pick better representatives and hoping they can make a difference just isn't working. You know, there's several ways that the Constitution is supposed to be protecting us, and it's a bit hard to go through it in 1 minute. But my website is Friedbaum, either .org.com or healingconstitution.org. First method I approach is we've got 29 senators in the state of Utah, and we've got 29 counties. And the Constitution would have us have a Republican form of government, which is guaranteed us under the Fourth Article of Faith. And we should have one senator per each county. And that would give us a conservative representation in all the states in the country, except maybe Hawaii. And California wouldn't be able to go as left as they can. This happened in 1963 when Earl Warren took up a case. And Earl Warren was the governor of California. He hated these counties with more cows than people, telling them what to do. And so when he was appointed Chief Justice by Eisenhower, this was a passion of his. And so the country's really been deprived of strong conservative state government since 1963 when the Supreme Court passed that.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Well, I'll start with a disclaimer. I don't think anyone on the stage is more fiscally and socially conservative than I am. Now, maybe they'll debate that. But if you go look at electjoshrandall.com, you can read about it, and you can see where I stand on things. Having said that, I will tell you this. Democrats are not the enemy. Democrats are not the enemy right now. The enemy in this country is some false educational ideas, flattery of prominent men, and general immorality. That's the enemy. I like what Brent had to say when he talked about the changes that we need. We need to change some hearts, and we need to change some souls. And I know that sounds spiritual to a lot of people, but we are in Utah County. This is a spiritual county. That's the truth. We need to speak in ways where we address what the enemy is. And I would agree with what, Chandler said too. Socialism is one of those false ideologies. It doesn't work. He's right. But we need to have the narrative right, and we need to speak the way that's going to persuade and change people. People can change. That's what we need to do. Changing people.
Thank you, Josh.
You know, for the last year, I've been working on this Senate campaign in one form or fashion, and one of the things that's been very clear to me as I've traveled around the state is Utahns want, they deserve, and they need to have a conservative that's going to go back to Washington and fight to get good things done. I was reading the news this morning and thinking about actually some work that we did 3 or 4 years ago. Walton Representative Cheryl Acton came into my office when I was Speaker of the House and wanted to change the statute in the state to make Utah's laws more pro-life. And then shortly thereafter, McKay and Lisenby came in and wanted to pass some legislation to also make laws in Utah more pro-life. And before I got into the legislature, I actually served on a board of directors that helped with preventing abortions and preventing child abuse. And I care deeply about this issue. And the attorneys told me at the time, these things are going to be litigated in the courts, they're going to be tied up forever. And my point was, I don't care. Let's pass this legislation. We need to fight for the things that matter to us as Utahns. We need to fight for the things that we value in this state. And that's what getting good things done looks like, is caring about our values and doing what we can to protect our values. Thank you.
Thank you. So for this next question, we'll start with Carolyn. And the question is, and again, this is the same question for all of you. The question is, what makes you better equipped than any other candidate running to actually change Washington?
Okay. Wow. All right. I will tell you the work that I've done, both for Senator Lee and when I worked for the Utah House Majority under Greg Hughes, makes clear the work that I have done on deeply conservative, constitutionally based policy allows me to understand these issues from a constitutional basis better than anybody else running in this race. I will also say that my expertise as a mother who has raised 5 boys reasonably successfully. I think there are a lot of times we learn in dealing with these relationships in families that we have to figure out and understand how to negotiate different opinions without compromising on principle and what the absolute most important goal is. And that is what I have spent my entire life doing, both in my home in the 20 years that I was home raising my boys and in my work in politics. Perfect timing. That is the skill that I bring.
I'm very different than every other candidate in this race because I've worked in all 3 branches of the federal government. I worked in the Congress. I was lucky enough after law school to become a law clerk to Robert Bork, probably the top constitutional scholar and one of the most best conservative judges in the country. I worked for President Reagan in his Justice Department. I worked in the White House as Associate White House Counsel for President Bush. And then as I talked about, I spent all the 30-some years changing the Supreme Court and lower court justices through the Federal Society. Nobody in this race has that type of experiences. I've had 2 presidents who have trusted me with this, and I've spent my entire life, even as a practicing lawyer, representing individuals and large companies in important cases and advocating for them. So at every level, I've represented clients. I've been in the government. I've seen the blood sport it is, particularly with Judge Bork, and know how to do that. Thank you.
This is an important question, and I think, what you're going to hear from all these candidates, and you as a state delegate, you've got a very important role. I mean, you're vetting so many right now, and you're going to hear a lot of conservative ideology. Most people here are going to be espousing conservative ideals. What I think is the most important thing, though, and the quality that you should be looking for as a delegate, and what you should be looking for as citizens, is who has demonstrated the willingness to stand up. Who's demonstrated the willingness to stand up and fight the establishment? It's the establishment that's got us into $34.5 trillion in debt. Open borders, you name it, all the issues we have today. I've done that time and time again. I entered the race in May when Mitt Romney was still undecided and continued to challenge him from day one. And others in this race, come in subsequently. We've now got a number of folks that have entered the race, but I've demonstrated that time and time again. That's why I've encouraged people to go to TrentStaggs.com. Take a look at a page that I have entitled Proven Fighter. Not only was I willing to challenge Romney and call him out time and again, but I stood up to lockdowns while as a mayor, rejected mandates and of any kind, and I've fought high-density housing, inappropriate materials in school, you name it. So I've not just talked the talk, but I'm able to walk the walk, and that's what we need back in D.C., is somebody who's going to go back and fight the establishment.
So I mentioned that my grandpa was a coal miner. When he was in his late 20s, in a terrible mine accident where a fellow worker got caught on fire during a smoke break, he raced to save him and ended up with third-degree burns over 75% of his body. And he said, "We need good men and women in our coal mines, but I don't want you to be one of them." So he said, "Go get all the education you can and get a good job." From BYU, where I graduated top of my class, I went to Harvard Law School and got a law degree. I also went to Oxford and got a master's in history. I followed my grandpa's advice. I went and got all the education I could. If you look at DC, you see a consistent formula. You see young senators with good credentials make big impacts for their states. You can see that in Texas with Ted Cruz. You can see that in Arkansas with Tom Cotton. Ohio with J.D. Vance. I'm an option for Utah, offering that. Strong academic credentials that are respected and mean something in DC, but not going into it straight from school. I got real life experience to supplement my book smarts. 10 years ago, I started a company that supports children's literacy. And it lets me do this not as a career, but as an opportunity to promote Utah's values.
I don't mean to put myself above the other candidates as I try and answer this honestly, but I try and seek the will of God in everything I do. I try and work in humility when that's called for, and in boldness when that's called for. And God has worked several miracles in my life, daily miracles. I think when you think of George Washington kneeling down by his horse in prayer, coming up with a strategy to just keep the army alive, suffer loss after loss after loss, until he's able to pull off a victory that the world thought was impossible. This is the way I live my life. You have to avoid temptation in the richest club on earth, which is the U.S. Senate. I don't care about big mansions. I don't care about new houses. I care about, when I meet my Maker, being judged for my actions. I want those same patriots that have revealed themselves to Wilford Ruth in the St. George Temple to give me a handshake and say thank you for trying to restore what we began.
Well, I would say as a legislator, you're going to legislate what you are. And to tell you a little bit about what I am, I'm a father of 6 kids under the age of 10, concerned about the next generation. I am a CPA. For my living, what I do is an audit manager right now for the Trust Lands Administration, which some of you might have concerns about how trust lands are administered and what we do with those lands. But I look at laws, I look at contracts, I look at leases, I look at the details, and then I'm looking for financial ramifications in hundreds of pages of law. It's different. I know it's different work. It's a lot of work that people don't want to do in a different forum than we were in. I asked how many people wanted to be a CPA. People don't want to. It's not the funnest work sometimes in a lot of people's minds. But that's what I would bring to the Senate, is somebody who's going to comb through legislation for the financial ramifications and help simplify it for other senators and show them, say, hey, this is how we're going to make the changes. It's a different mindset. It's a different approach. But it's unique. I haven't run for office before, but I feel strong. They said, what would you look for? Someone who can help us strengthen the country and help us fix the problems. I'm confident that I can help us with our budget and get other senators on board. I'm confident with that.
You know, we all know that the stakes are really, really high in this election this year. And I think we all know that it's very risky to elect someone that's unproven. And what we need is someone that's been tested and trusted to do the work that we care about, to go back and represent Utah's values in the U.S. Senate. With me, you have that. Whether it's the biggest tax cuts in the history of the state, keeping government small and taxes low, or calling the legislature into special session in June of 2020 to make DEI and CRT illegal in terms of having those issues taught in our schools. Or whether it's taking on the EPA and suing the EPA to keep Utah's power plants open so your power rates didn't double and you didn't have to worry about brownouts and blackouts. We have to elect someone that has been through the fire, that we know can do the work and know can go back to Washington and represent this amazing state. Thanks.
I've never been in politics, so I'm a business person, and that sets me aside uniquely in this election. And I firmly, and I can't say this strong enough, with the problems that I see happening in America right now, a politician is not the answer. We need more business people. We need business leaders exactly like Donald Trump. Now, when I met with senators like Senator Mike Lee, Senator Ted Cruz, and others, they ask the same questions you delegates do, which is how do we know how you're going to vote when you actually get in Washington and the establishment starts putting the pressure on you? So I have lived a life where I'm not going to go into it, I have suffered unspeakable hardships in my personal life, many. I started a business out of my garage, and with no outside investors, I built it into one of the largest pest control companies in the country. That's hard. It's hard. When I entered this race, I ran television ads and radio ads all up and down the state calling against Mitch McConnell. Even when my own campaign staff said, don't do that, he'll put millions of dollars against you in your own Republican primary. I did it to show you delegates and everyone in Utah that I will stand up. And I'm not just talking about it, I will stand up, and I have. And I'll keep doing it in Washington.
Thank you very much. So this next question, we'll start with you, Brent. And the question is, what do you see as the greatest danger With regard to the central bank digital currency, do you think it should be allowed? Why or why not?
That's a good question. As we all know, we're getting more into the electronic age, and I serve on a bank board, and I know that none of the banking can happen now without electronic transactions. But where we're getting now is where we're worried about the safeguards, whether or not we're keeping up with the technology in a sense that all of us are going to be protected. I worry, like I think you do every night, that every transaction that you have in your bank account can go away with just the flick of a switch. We know that Putin and Russia are hacking into our, potentially our elections and everything about our banking. We know that China is doing the same thing. We're in a constant onslaught. And unless we stay vigilant, as we grow through this electronic economy, we're going to be in trouble. And one of the things we need to protect, of course, is our personal identities as well as our incomes.
No, I don't think it should be implemented. I said in the previous debate, hey, I'm not a fan of centralized much of anything, right? I think that what happens, and with respect to centralized central bank digital currency, is that it's really and highly susceptible to tyranny. And to the question earlier about the Patriot Act and FISA, we've seen this government actually abuse its power and authority. And I don't want to give any more of that. That's what our founders understood. And they understood, that's why they developed a system called federalism that we're not doing a great job at right now. And I think that's where somebody with my experience, both in the business sector, with dealing with all the regulation that we've had to deal with, and that, but also as a mayor for 10, 11 years, I said I've been on the front lines of pushing back against not just federal, but also state and county overreach. And so we need somebody with that type of perspective in DC that's going to go back there and safeguard our rights as we the people, that understands that local governance is what governs best. And that's what we need, is to be able to get back there and make sure that the federal government's only doing what it's supposed to in Article 1, Section 8.
Yeah, the issue is in the name, central. Right there, cues you into that. We are so far from the gold standard, which is where we started as a nation. Then we went to silver. Now we're way off silver. Now we're $34 trillion in debt. Imagine the nightmare when we just aren't even printing anything and it's just all digital. It just continues us on that path of easy money, and that's been the federal government's approach. A few of us up here have had experience in business. The first thing they'll tell you at the BYU Business School is business is a cycle. The economy is a cycle, and we keep delaying the constriction part. And it's hard. No president wants to oversee a recession. But it comes at a great expense, kicking the can down the road, printing more money. If you look right now at how many $100 bills are in circulation, it will terrify you. The solution for the Fed is to print, to control the interest rates, to keep the economy strong so our president doesn't look bad. And that comes at a great expense to us as we pile up $34 trillion of debt.
Thank you. Full disclosure, I'm an authorized partner with a company called Goldback. If you haven't seen the Goldback, go to goldback.com. They're bills that are infused with gold in the middle of two plastic sheets. They have 1/1000th of an ounce of gold in one Goldback and more in the others. It's a great thing. It's technology that allows us to use gold and silver. As the founders anticipated, as the writers of the Constitution said, really our only job should be securing the weights and measures of our currency. We should get rid of the Fed and put real gold in everybody's pocket. Not just gold, other precious metals. And so that's the solution.
Well, being the last person to answer just about, am I the last person to answer this?
No.
Okay.
Great last night.
After some of the answers are already given, I feel like I'm redundant now, but I mean, the worry of central digital banking currency is whatever the priorities of the people are who hold the levers of that bank. I mean, it's kind of like the Federal Reserve, and which I would tell you I would decentralize or decommission. from some of its mandates. We've got a real problem that we're all watching the market to see what the Federal Reserve is going to do with interest rates. Think about how much they're manipulating our economy and how much problems they're causing in volatility. But I think of these truckers up in Canada. I don't know all the ins and outs of the story, but the government getting in and freezing their assets, not allowing them to get in their accounts because the social priorities of their government aren't being met. I mean, that's central digital banking currency. It's written all over that. I mean, there's just no way. We can't watch that happen. We can't have the social priorities of the people in power determining how we use our bank accounts. I mean, law of the harvest is out the window. Capitalism, out the window. It's scary that we're even thinking about it.
The tenet of this question honestly just ticks me off. We live in a time right now, the answer isn't no, excuse my language, but it's hell no. And I'll tell you why. We live in a time when there is so much power concentrated with so few individuals in Washington, D.C., that they have the power to create chaos in our economy, chaos in our lives. And the last thing we need is another tool to be used to weaponize our government against us. And I know that sounds maybe like it's a little conspiratorial, but I actually believe we live in a time when that's not terribly far-fetched. Whether you're talking about having Mitch McConnell have power for 16 years in Washington, our founding fathers never imagined that someone would have power that length of time, or the fact that now, because Congress is not doing its job, bureaucracies and unelected bureaucrats all over Washington are trying to rule our lives. The last thing we can afford is to give them more tools to create problems for the American people. So we've got to be vigilant about these types of things. Thank you.
When's the last time a centralized anything worked well? So why don't you please share with me one centralized system that we've done that isn't corrupt? You show me a federal agency, especially all these unconstitutional, bureaucratic, I call them the three-letter agencies that make me want to say four-letter words. You show me the one that isn't corrupt, that hasn't been corrupted. Why in the world? This is a scary topic. This is terrifying. How did it go with having the digital election machines, the polling machines? Did that work out well? You trust those? So having done those, are you thinking, hey, maybe what we need to do is turn over our currency also to the elite? This has so many scary implications, but this is a talking point for the future. This is why we need good leaders in Washington who will stand up, because I have a strong sense that the deep state and some unsavory people really want this to happen. You need people who have no sense of self-preservation, none whatsoever, that cannot be tempted, that cannot be bought, cannot be sold. And that's me.
So when I was working for Senator Mike Lee, actually I worked repeatedly with Utah Bankers Association to ensure that Biden appointees were not people who support basically social credit scoring through our banking system, because we had to push back against that a few times. I'll tell you, I also worked with Representative Cheryl Acton at the state legislature and a number of other legislators on subsequent legislation, but she had a bill in 2022 that was killed, I think it was killed in rules, that would ban the use of social credit scores. I put together a working group with Marlo Oaks, the state treasurer, with the AG Sean Reyes, with a number of legislators and business people over that next year in order to work on ESG legislation, because social credit scores is part of ESG, is part of CBDC. It is all one and the same, and just utilizing different tools in order to come up with various ways that this could be addressed. The House and Senate had their own working groups, did some amazing things in 2023, but I was the first outside individual to start focusing on this and fight back against it in the state of Utah.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with you, Trent. And the question is, how will the voters know if you were to go to Washington, D.C., that you will do what you say, and you'll, let me say this again. You'll do what you say, and you won't cave to the pressures.
Excellent question. I get this all the time. You know, we've done 70, 80 town halls across the state, campaigned for over a year. I say, hey, look, it's very easy. Take a look at that website at TrentStaggs.com. Look at Proven Fighter. Look at all of my time in elected office, 10, going on 11 years now. Go talk to a Riverton resident. Ask them, how do they like Mayor Trent Staggs? What has he done? Has he stood up for you? Has he stood up to the establishment? It's like Congressman Matt Gaetz said when he was just out here the other week endorsing my candidacy. He said, look, Mayor Staggs has demonstrated a willingness to stand up in times where it was not easy. And that's what I have done and demonstrated over and over again. In being the only one to challenge Mitt Romney to saying no to lockdowns and to mandates, to fighting back against high-density housing, to standing up to inappropriate materials in school, and why I've received the endorsement of Moms for America and the founders of Utah Parents United. It goes on and on. I have been there. I've actually not just talked the talk, but I've walked the walk. I've been able to do that, and I have demonstrated to others these endorsements. These are folks that I have intentionally gone out and asked for their endorsement because I want to signal to all of you, the delegates, who I'm going to align with. You should know that as delegates, who I'm going to go back there, and they're going to have my back too and keep me true.
While I was at Harvard, I read that you shouldn't get into politics until you don't need to be in politics. And I certainly had classmates who went straight on, that path from law school into staffing positions and then into political positions. But I didn't want to do this as a career. If 2 terms was enough for George Washington, 2 terms is more than enough for me. I wanted to go out and be able to do this after I had the chance to prove myself to myself and to others. So for me, I feel like I've had the chance to live the American dream, to be the grandson of a coal miner, to study at some of the best institutions in the world, to live in great cities, great experiences, and then to start my own company and move back to my hometown where I'm raising my 4 young kids with my wife. I don't have anything to go to prove to anyone there. All I want to do is preserve the American dream for our posterity, for our kids. And that's why cutting back on the size of our federal government is crucial. At Oxford, I had the chance to see other nations that sometimes the liberals point to. Denmark, those Scandinavian countries, and say, well, we should follow that model. Well, I've seen it, and I like what we have here better. I know that it's what's been key to our success so far, and is the key to our future.
You might not know. You might be deceived. A lot of people are spending a lot of money to deceive you. I would suggest that you do your best to investigate each candidate, to ask which one is most likely to resist the temptations of office, because a lot of people are getting very rich and powerful, and they wonder why people spend millions of dollars to get a job that pays a small part of that. You might want to see how close they are to defending the Constitution, how it looks like they live a covenant life with the Constitution, trying to be true to it. And so my advice is that you do all you can, is the advice of Scriptures, and pray about it. And until you get a firm answer, that you surrender your will of the vote to the Lord's desire. I believe that's possible, and I hope that's what we all do, including myself as a delegate.
Well, for me, it's the principles that you stand for. It's the person you are. And kind of what Jeremy said. I mean, it's who you are. It's a moral imperative for me. I will tell you, I'm not going to vote for deficit spending. I'm not going to vote for debt ceiling suspensions. That's an accounting side of me. It's also that I have to budget and support a family of 6 little kids, but it's not part of my fabric. And along with that, I mean, there are different things. The Respect for Marriage Act, I wouldn't have voted for it. I talk about faith, family, and fiscal discipline. This is who I am. This is the core of my life. This is the core of what I consider to be our founding fathers' lives, frankly, and our Constitution. Faith, family, fiscal discipline. It's just, you get what you vote for, no question. But those are commitments that I make to you. I would meet with you in town halls. I'll be available. If you reach out now at electjoshRandall.com, I will respond. I'll send back a response to your email. if you're a delegate who's, by raise of hands, who's reached out that I haven't got back with? One person? You talk to me afterwards. I will get back with you if I haven't. Brianna, make a note of that. Thank you.
You know, without a doubt, one of the themes of this, these name tags, I'm telling you. Without a doubt, one of the themes of this election has been talk is cheap. People don't want to have one thing told to them on the campaign trail and have someone show up in Washington and act totally different. They feel like we've been there, done that. And this is hard work. It takes a spine. It takes a lot of grit to stick through and work through hard issues. Let me give you one quick example. Kara Birkeland came into my office in 2021, said, we need to pass a bill through the Utah legislature that keeps girls' sports for only girls. We passed it through the House, couldn't get it through the Senate. We tried and tried that year. We came back, passed it again the next year through the House, finally got it through the Senate. But we had all kinds of people telling us that, and I had people calling me daily, business leaders, political leaders, others saying this was a solution looking for a problem. Well, we know that's not the case. We have to be courageous enough to stand up for issues like this and others, and have someone in Washington that's been through this kind of experience before, that has fought these kinds of things and is going to do the same when they get back there. Thank you.
I have a saying, the way you do anything is the way you do everything. I know a lot of people here were planning to run for the U.S. Senate for a long time. I wasn't. I got frustrated. I had had enough, and I mean it from the literalist of sense. I've had it here before where I thought we were electing one thing in Utah and got something else. And so I stood up and I said, I know what I will do. And I tried to demonstrate that immediately by doing what apparently others didn't. And that's literally running radio and TV ads against Mitch McConnell under the threat that he would reciprocate. I have been in a room with my child in the NICU with all 13 of his medical people saying, take him off life support, he's going to be, quote unquote, a vegetable. And chose not to do that because it wasn't the right thing. I have run a business where I had to meet a budget and a payroll. Went several long periods where I paid myself nothing. There's no one with their hooks into me. I have made covenants and promises only to my wife, my family, my God, and now to the people of Utah.
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. Thank you, Jason. I do believe that those who have not spent months and years planning for their next political office are the very type of people we need in political office at this period of time, which I believe is, our nation is in a state that is in its most precarious position, I would say, in my entire lifetime, and probably significantly longer than that. We need people who are stepping up for something other than another political office. And as somebody who raised my boys at home for many years, then began working in politics, and has the knowledge and the understanding to do what needs to be done, and an unwillingness to compromise on important principles. I'll say, I've lived in Utah for 36 years. My family's from here. I live in a town founded by my third great grandfather, but I was born and raised a Mormon in New York. And you know what? I know the games, I know how to work around things, and I understand how to stand firm on principle, because truth is truth, and I will never compromise on that.
I've never changed. When I worked for Judge Bork, we fought to bring constitutional principles to every decision we fought for. When I worked for President Reagan, we fought for tort reform. We fought for what we called Reaganomics. Some people call it supply-side economics. Tell me if that doesn't sound like what we should be fighting for today. Reduce taxes, free trade, and reduce government regulations. I fought behind the scenes for no glory for years, 30-plus years. And I've got names: Justice Scalia, Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, Justice Amy Coney Barrett. These are not small things. A lot of the people on the stage today are talking about ideals and what they'll do. I've been there. I've done it for years. I've done it behind the scenes. I've never changed. I know how it's done. And to be in the game, you have to know how to play the game. Thank you. That was perfect, right?
Okay, for this next question, we'll be starting with you, Chandler. And the question is, if elected senator, what specifically would you do to push back on the federal government's overreach on public lands here in Utah?
Well, we have a terrible situation in Utah, and this dates back to really to Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, a lot of people admire Teddy Roosevelt instituting the national parks, but sometimes he's the epitome of this mindset that liberal elites in other parts of the country know what's best for us in our part of the country. So you set up the national parks, and then and I'm not knocking on the national parks, but I am knocking on this attitude of a liberal base on the coast, on the East Coast, who think they know best for us what we should do here in our state. And that started at that time with setting aside wide swaths of land in America that tie up our resources, that shut down our minds, that restrict our energy independence, our ability to be energy independent. So as a senator, I would be looking to free up our lands to get control back to the state where we know what's best use of our resources, to open our minds, to get our power independence again, and to be able to make good use of the resources that we have here in our state.
I'd cozy up to President Trump and ask him to have an experiment and give Utah back all its federal lands and see how that works. I've already sort of cozied up to President Trump, but not because I wanted to, but because I thought it was the right thing. I introduced a petition to the city of Provo to rename the Provo Airport the Melania Trump Airport in Provo. I just used whatever charm and innovation I could to get this to be done, and it would be a top priority. What are you laughing at? Okay, thank you.
Keep us awake, Jim. Well, I believe in the principle that government is best administered close to the people, and that certainly applies with lands here in Utah. It's amazing to me that for whatever reason, some of these states that were territories and gained statehood so late have still remained largely federal land. And for me, I mean, I work at CITLA, or Trust Lands Administration, and I guess a lot of my dealings there makes me biased, but I really feel like Utahns know how to do things well. We have a very shrewd and very smart people that make good decisions. And I'll tell you, I think part of it is just we have to make some negotiations, but I'm all for bringing as much of it back to Utah as we can. I agree with Jeremy. Give it to Utah. Let us make use of it. Let us make revenue of it. We're wasting a lot of land. The Trust Lands Administration is big into the idea of we can't waste the land. We've got to make use of it. Whether it's oil and gas drilling, whether it's potash, whether it's whatever it is, there's so many things that we can do. We can't waste it. And we need to be clear in articulating that to the federal government to say, hey, this isn't good for you, and it's really not good for Utah.
It's very simple but difficult work. Legislate and litigate. This issue across this state is one of the most important issues that we face, and it's one of the things that I'm going to lean into the heaviest when I get back to Washington, D.C. From a legislate standpoint, it makes no sense that Wyoming and Alaska have exemptions from the Antiquities Act and Utah does not. We should. I will fight for that. In addition to fighting for changes to the Antiquities Act to rein in the powers of the executive branch to even do this kind of nonsense. And from a litigate standpoint, while I was Speaker, we fired up at least 3, maybe 4 lawsuits, I'm going to have to go back and check, relative to public lands in the state of Utah, some of which we've never done before. But again, if you don't try, you're never going to win. We have been playing too nice, too long, and going along to get along far too long on the public lands issue in the state of Utah. And if we don't start to do some things wildly different, both with our state leaders, shoulder to shoulder with our federal leaders, this problem is not going to get fixed. It's going to get worse.
What's happening is offensive. New York, Texas, Kansas, Maine, these are states where the federal government owns less than, how much do you think? 2%. Less than 2% of the land. And yet that East Coast elitists come to us and say, now that we have all of our land, we think we need to control yours. That's offensive. I'm from Monticello down in the San Juan area. So when they implemented the Bears Ears, Big Brother saying, you know what, you don't know how to be responsible stewards to the land, we're going to go ahead and do it for you. So we need to stand up and be clear. Where did this start? It started with the Enablement Act when the state was organized in 1894, 1896, where the state, they were supposed to sell the land back to us. And then they passed FLTMA, I think in 1976, which reversed that, said, you know what, we're going to do it to everyone in the East, but you in the West, we want to control your land, we're not going to sell it back. It's not right. I want to support that Senator Mike Lee's Houses Act, which says give us the federal land at least right now immediately that's around our cities so we can board affordable housing. I like Senator Mike Lee's More PILT Act that says let's have the Secretary of Interior go back and really assess how much the land's actually worth to double or triple those PILT payments. How about suing and litigating for lost economic rents? There's a lot of things that we can do. And what we don't really want is their money. We want them to give us the land. And we have several avenues to do that. I cannot wait to fight to get Utah's land back.
Yes, so we have got to get rid of the Antiquities Act. When that was passed, well, it wasn't passed, it was passed. But when the Antiquities Act was implemented, it was all about giving the executive branch the authority to lock up our lands in order to protect antiquities. And if you look at the act, it says utilizing the smallest area possible in order to protect that antiquity. Do you know what the Obama administration started defining as an antiquity? The night sky, right? They are completely violating the restrictions and the restraints of the Antiquities Act. It has been completely abused. It needs to be gone. Additionally, FLTMA 1976, that was, we're done. All of the land and some of this had been litigated in the past with eastern states, and they have won. We need, and eastern states, Florida and other states like this, we need to now fight back. Our Attorney General, I spoke with him just a few months ago, he said we are preparing a lawsuit. It's been funded in part by the legislature. We need to fight back against FLTMA and get it gone.
The first thing we need to understand is that a lot of people back east have this vision that we don't care about our lands, that we're polluting them, we're ruining them, and they need to protect the lands against us. I go off-roading, sometimes on mountain bikes, sometimes in a Jeep, and I've never been in southern Utah or even the mountains of northern Utah where I haven't been around the people of those locations who have treated the lands in which they live and the lands in which they recreate with the utmost respect. I've seen more damage to a trail from a heavy rainstorm than I have Jeeps going across it. So when I bring people from back east, as much as I can, I take them out and I show them so that they understand. Because like I said before in others, you have to win the hearts, minds, and souls. They think we're terrible. The other thing, Jeremy, you made a good point. It was a friendship my father made with President Trump that got Bears ears reduced back to a more reasonable standard. Elections matter. We have to have a president that's going to, and we have to have a Congress that's going to be able to scale back on these intrusions on our land and our livelihoods.
I was picking up Senator Tommy Tuberville from the airport a few weeks ago. Beautiful day, just snowed, great blue skies. He said, y'all have a fantastic state here. I said, yeah, too bad 2/3 of it is owned or controlled by the federal government. He looked at me and he said, I did not know that. It's going to take leadership, somebody from Utah that has demonstrated that ability to build coalitions to actually get this done. And that's what I've been able to do. One of the committees that I want to be able to serve on as a senator is natural resources, which encompasses public lands. And I think having been on the business side, where I've taken a company public, served on the board of directors of a company that was an energy company that owned oil and gas assets, had operations in eastern Utah. I mean, this is something I understand. And in talking with Senator Tuberville, he thought there was a great opportunity to go ahead and speak with other states, particularly those in these western states where it's so unfair. I mean, some have already pointed out, Connecticut has 0.3% of their land owned and controlled by the federal government. So the left likes to talk about equity and fairness, right? I think it's totally hypocritical with respect to our public lands. And this is something that if we can point out, I believe, and be able to serve and have representation in those committees, that we can go ahead and finally get the land back into state control.
Thank you. This next question will start off with you, Jeremy. And the question is, what is the first law you would work to repeal or pass if you were elected as senator?
Well, I'm going to change that a little bit, because what I'm interested in is getting rid of SB 54. That's why I joined this race, because no candidate has ever used his standing to challenge SB 54 up to the Supreme Court. It went up with Keep My Voice, but they rejected it because they didn't have standing. So that's my first priority. As much as I'd love to be a senator, we need to get rid of that infernal thing. And by the way, we have a lot of smart people here, but they have trouble reading a pie chart. When you have a two-way race, the more constitutional conservative Republican wins in the primary. But our history has been with a three-way race, the least constitutional conservative wins. And we're facing up to a 6 or 7 man primary. I see somebody in the audience who's been active in asking Democrats to join the Republican Party. You saw them infiltrate us in our caucuses, and it's going to be worse in our primary. And they're going to have a 30 or 40% block voting for the least conservative candidate. I won't mention his name here because he's not here to defend himself. However, oh, I see stop.
Yep. Thank you, Jeremy. Josh.
I don't know how to respond to that answer. I'll tell you, the first thing I would look to repeal, in 2019 we passed a bill called the Federal Fair Employee Compensation Act, and this is something I've talked with other people on the stage a little bit about, but I'm convinced that this is crucial. It guarantees back pay for furloughed federal employees who don't go to work during shutdowns. And this is something that makes us a little different. Different approaches by people up on this stage. But I'm one who says, and I would also push for a 15 to 25% pay reduction mandatory during the shutdown for our discretionary federal employees. The reason being is we have to get our government in a place where during shutdowns we are better off financially than we are when the government's operating. During a partial shutdown, we're better off financially. We have way too much infighting in the Republican Party every year in October when the appropriations deadlines come up. We've got to get to a point where the shutdowns are not pushing us back against the wall every year, and it becomes, pick your poison. We either have deficit spending, or we shut down, and we still have deficit spending later on. That's got to stop. This is key. This is key to fixing our budget problems. Absolutely key.
So in the short term, love to have the ability to close the border. But in the long term, we have to change the way the federal government budgets, and a balanced budget amendment is the only way that we're going to get the federal government back on track. And you know, in Utah, just yesterday we were named the state with the most positive economic outlook in the country for the 17th year in a row. And that doesn't happen by chance. And not only do we balance our budget here, but while I was a lawmaker and then Speaker of the House, we did two things that have fundamentally changed the way this state thinks about small government and low taxes. We now in this state, before the legislature spends a penny, something I did with a couple of lawmakers while I was Speaker of the House, the first thing that they do now is they discuss and debate and set aside money for tax cuts on an annual basis. That is an important thing. Just imagine in Washington, if we had a balanced budget amendment and we put in place just a few of the systems we have here in Utah to get our government back to the size that it should be. You constrain the growth in bureaucracy, and you unleash the American economy and let the American consumer and all of us keep the money that we've earned and spend on the things we care about instead of letting the government do it. So thank you.
Laws to repeal, and you're only giving me 1 minute? Where do you begin with that? How about FLTMA? We just talked about that one. How about the Dingle Act, which was, I think I saw an article called the Dingle Swingle. Wasn't a very good land bill for us Utahns. What about the times when the Congress has instituted these unconstitutional bureaucracies? And I'm talking about, once again, the 3-letter words that make us want to say 4-letter words. These are things that we can repeal. But when you want to talk about laws that I want to repeal, I love the Constitution. I love it. I believe the Constitution was divinely inspired. That inspiration started from our founding fathers suffering in tyranny in Europe for over 1,000 years in many cases. Tyranny because all the power was at the top and very little civil liberties. So when they came to the United States of America after suffering and going to war with England to fight this concept that we want elected representatives, we want to be able to elect those representatives. They instituted the vertical axis of federalism. They instituted the horizontal axis, the separation of powers. Those things were divinely inspired because of the tyranny under which they've suffered. George Washington encouraged us in his farewell address in the sacred maintenance of the Constitution with wisdom and virtue. We have too many laws that are the blasphemous maintenance because they fracture federalism and they fracture the separation of powers. We need those laws gone.
And you mentioned this previously, but I worked on this when I was in Senator Mike Lee's office, and that is the REINS Act. That takes executive branch agency regulation, which we all know that the regulatory state is actually the regime that we are most living under as opposed to laws passed by Congress. Those people we elect to represent us, right? REINS says if you have legislation, if you have rule that does one of 3 different things, 2 of the big ones, has an impact on the U.S. economy of greater than $100 million annually or raises consumer prices, that those rules cannot be implemented until Congress has voted on them. Congress are the people who we elect to represent us. They are answerable to us. That is constitutionally, and does exactly what you're talking about, Jason. That is constitutionally the system that was put in place in order to protect us from the power and force of government in that way. Second, I do have a second one, and that is one-issue bills. In the state of Utah, we have one-issue bills. You could solve a whole lot of problems if you couldn't Christmas tree 1,000 different things onto one good bill that a whole bunch of people make a lot of really bad compromises to get through.
Carolyn's right, and the biggest threat to our budget and our democracy is these omnibus bills where we have Senate rules that allow them to shove them down our throats without a senator being able to look at them, find out what's in them, and what should be taken out. The reason they put it, those rules have got to go. If you've got a multi-trillion-dollar bill and you've got 24 hours to look at it, what are the chances that you're going to find the bad stuff in there enough to be able to criticize that bill or to amend that bill and to get things right? 0. I'm a lawyer. I would never let a client sign a contract, even a 20-page contract, even a 4-page contract, unless you had time to read it and understand what you were signing. And yet we do this constantly. The reason they shove those through is because we wouldn't put up with it. Do you know there are trillions of dollars that go to non-government organizations? These are quite often liberal organizations that they can't pass legislation to have the government do it, so they funnel money to liberal organizations so that they can do what Congress can't get through and do themselves. That's got to stop.
Well, yeah, I'm with Jason here. I only have 1 minute to talk about everything you want to repeal. Boy, listen, the border has to be secure. We're going to do that day one with President Trump back in office and with the majority of America First constitutional conservatives in the Senate when we retake it. So, border wall, remain in Mexico, E-verify, cutting off benefits to illegal immigrants, period. That will go ahead and take care of it day one. But we've got to get back to process. This is something Mike Lee has talked about consistently. Look, 1974, we passed the Congressional Budget Act, 12 appropriation subcommittees. Each one of them is supposed to be producing a budget with enough time for debate and amendment. That doesn't happen today. It's totally un-American to have 4 people, the firm, right, go back in a back room and come back out with a 1,200-page piece of legislation and say, you've got 24 hours to pass, the government's going to shut down, or it'll be your fault. You know what? If pressed with that situation, I've already said, no, I'll go ahead and let it shut down then. Enough. I got into this race because it is the height of immorality, I said, that placed $34.5 trillion, which started out at $32 trillion when I first announced my candidacy, on my 14-year-old son, my 11-year-old daughter. Enough is enough. We're not going to do this anymore. We're going to get back to process, but it's going to require enough Republicans that are America First, constitutional conservatives, not just people with R's next to their name.
Yes.
A lot of good things have been mentioned to repeal. I've made notes so we can work on the repeals. There is one thing, I'm not usually a fan of passing and growing anything, of more, but there is one thing that didn't get mentioned that I want to highlight, and that is, I hate when someone makes a rule that applies to me or to you, but not to themselves. And Congress has a bad habit of doing that. And one specific area I would target right away, I'd love to see pass, is to shut down their insider trading. You see the headlines after COVID, these secret, these private meetings that leaders in Congress have, they get the inside scoop on what's coming, and coincidentally, they make a fortune buying and selling. Now, anyone else that did that would have years in jail. But time and again, they make things difficult for us to accomplish, but they exclude themselves. Pensions, insurance, investments, they have a bad habit of it, and I'd like to see them held to the same standards that they want the rest of us to be held to.
Okay, so I'm going to make an executive decision on something. There's a short video that that John Curtis has provided that we are going to play. But I want you guys, since you are here, to have the final word. And so we're going to do the video briefly.
If he can't show,
hey, don't shoot the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger.
If he can't show, he doesn't get involved.
No. Hold up, just a second. The executive decision is to allow them to have the last message rather than the video, which is what was going to happen. The video is not my decision. We're going to play the video, but I will have the last question be these folks because they are here in person. That's the executive decision I'm making. So we'll play the video real quick. Chase, I think, is who I was told to mention. Play the video. I believe it's 2 or 3 minutes, and then we will go back to these folks.
About 1 minute. The whole video. Take a vote on the video.
Hi, as many of you know, I'm John Curtis, and I've had the honor for the third congressional district for a number of years now. And to be with all of you and represent you in Washington, D.C., and I want you to know that's been a highlight for me. The relationships we've been able to develop, the things we've been able to do together, especially in our pushback of the federal government.
Get out of Washington.
Well, as you know, I'm running for the Senate seat, and I regret that I can't be with you tonight to be in person. But if I were there, I would assure you of 2 things. The first is that the reason that I'm running for the Senate instead of the 3rd Congressional District is my absolute conviction that I can actually serve you better there. It's a different platform. It's a more powerful platform to continue to work on these gnarly issues of public lands and federal government overreach. And the second thing is I wouldn't do this if I wasn't absolutely confident that I wouldn't be able to continue to come into your communities at the same rate that I have for the last number of years. And I'll make you a commitment that you'll continue to see me and my team will continue to show up and be there for you. And we won't forget the great relationships and the important things that we're working on. As you know, we've had some great success with public lands. I'm proud to say I've transferred more federal lands to state ownership than anyone in the state's history. That protects grazing, that protects outdoor recreation, off-road enthusiast use, and so many other things that all of you want to make sure that we're able to do on these lands, including extraction and grazing and the other ways that so many of you depend on this land for income. I also want you to know that I'll continue to push back on the narrative that our natural resources are somehow part of the problem, and instead continue to make my point that they're part of the solution. And I'm absolutely convinced that we can guide this country into the future, not just with energy independence, but energy dominance in many ways, dependent on what we have here, the natural resources that we have here in Utah. I'm working hard. I currently vice chair the Energy and Grid Security Subcommittee, and we're working, one of our biggest priorities, one of my biggest priorities is permitting reform, because as you well know, that's holding us back in so many different capacities. Also, I'm spending a lot of my time on other issues that are very important to you, spending, and I continue to vote against these outrageous spending bills, and more important than that, continue to look for ways that we can actually flatten and then turn down our spending curve. As you all do in your homes, you do in your cities and your counties, we need to do the same thing in Washington, D.C. Listen, I know my time is up. Once again, I'm sorry that I'm not with you. I trust you know that I care deeply about you and your issues, that I'll continue to make you and your issues my top priority in Washington, D.C. And I hope you'll reach out to me if you have any questions, and I hope to see you all very soon. I'm John Curtis, and many of you know me as the guy who has been serving in the 3rd Congressional District.
Well, like I said, out of respect to all of you who were able to be here in person, I wanted you all to have the last word rather than ending on the video. So that's why I wanted to interject the video beforehand. And I don't want, there's a couple more questions, but what I want to afford all of you to do rather than one last question, and Josh, you are next up, so we'll start with you. We're going to give you the entirety of your minute to talk about whatever issue is important to you. So it's your closing statements of sorts. What is something that you feel these delegates need to be aware of as they're making their consideration that should entice them to consider you as a candidate? And again, we'll start with you, Josh, and then back to Brad and on down the line.
Well, we need some major changes right now, and it's not easy to make major changes. I guess what I would say is, what makes me different is, I mean, as a CPA, obviously I'm focused on the budget, and I do believe that a lot of what we need to do right now in this country revolves around our problem living within our means in Congress. And I have a plan to do that. I have a plan specifically lined out how to privatize Social Security and privatize Medicare and move Medicaid and food stamps back to the states to eliminate and send everything else back to the states. I'm very much a constitutional candidate who believes in a defense, court system, post offices, and postal roads. Everything else you eliminate, you privatize, or you send back to the states. And I tell you, it's a different type of voice I have. I really believe in having someone on the Senate floor who can articulate well how to make those financial changes, constitutional changes, that are going to make the major cultural shift. It means we might lay off 1 to 1.5 million federal employees. I understand that's not an easy change, but I believe it. I believe we can do it. I'm one who will give my whole heart and soul for 12 years to doing that, to getting us that cultural change. We can do it.
Thank you, Josh. Well, what an honor to be here today. And I just want to end with this. About 18 months ago, I got called to a breakfast meeting with the folks like Stuart Adams and now Speaker of the House Mike Schultz and some others. And they basically said, Brad, we think you should run for the U.S. Senate. You understand this state better than almost anyone else. And you've proven that you're a good leader, you've proven that you're a strong conservative, and you've proven that you can make a big difference. And to be quite frank, my plan was to go back to my business. I've got a small business that I love. It's a great thing to do, but we ultimately made the decision to run. And the reason is this: Utah deserves, Utah needs to have someone that is proven and tested and trusted to go back to Washington and help fix this country's biggest problems. And they are massive. We've got to make sure that we infuse Utah values, Utah grit, and Utah wisdom into the process. And that is exactly what I intend to do as a conservative, to go back and fight for you and make a big difference to get this country where it needs to be. Thanks for the invitation.
I'm here because I woke up one morning and I couldn't take it anymore, not one more day. I'm here because our bloated federal government has been violating and blaspheming the sacredness of our Constitution, and they are literally robbing and selling your and my grandchildren's birthrights, near as I can tell, to our enemies abroad. And it's not right. If we don't stand up now, where are we going to be in 5 years? Where are we going to be in 7 years? So we not only have to have a balanced budget, we need to do it quickly. We need to do it immediately. Why? Why are career politicians constantly playing political games with my future, with your future, and with the future of your children? What are we leaving them? What are we leaving to our children, our grandchildren? This isn't a game. The border needs to be closed. It needs to be closed now. End catch and release, implement the stay in Mexico policy, and eliminate all incentives for people coming here to be first-class citizens instead of illegal immigrants. I want to thank you for being here today. I want to thank you for considering me, and I want to promise you, elect me, if you elect me to the U.S. Senate, you will be going to Washington with me. I will be going and doing and saying all the things that you wish were being said and done if you were there.
Too often we elect really good people to represent us who are very easily fooled by the establishment narrative, coming oftentimes out of institutions paid for and funded with our tax dollars, by the way, and that work to undermine everything that we love and care about. I have worked with our political leaders in this state for many years, a whole bunch of them, and I will tell you, every time they talk about the greatness of this state, I make sure that the next words out of my mouth are, this state is great because of our families, because of the stability of our families that are founded and based in a belief and faith in God. And we have to be, by the way, a whole lot more willing to say it. It is those principles that have made this nation what it is. It is those principles that have made this state what it is. And we need people who aren't running from that idea, trying to fit in with whatever those narratives are that they're being fed, and people who understand fundamentally what it is that makes this state and nation what it is. I have been behind the scenes doing that hard work because I care about the world that we leave to my children, your children, and all of our grandchildren, if I ever have some someday. Thank you.
I'm grateful for this this meeting. They handed out to us, I don't know if they handed it to all of you, that the effect of Christ on humankind. Brutality reigns where Christ is banished, kindness and forbearance govern where Christ is recognized and his teachings are followed. Judge Bork turned me onto a book when I clerked for him. It was by Richard John Newhouse, a theologian. It was called The Naked Public Square. And in this book, he made the case that under the First Amendment, when people were pushing religion and God out of the public square where discourse happens, what comes in? You got a vacuum, evil, bad, comes in. I've kept in my book, during the Constitution of the United States in one pocket, and in the other, a quote by Bastiat, and I think it sums it all up. It says, when misguided public opinion honors what is despicable and despises what is honorable, punishes virtue and rewards vice, encourages what is harmful and discourages what is useful, applauds falsehood and smothers truth, under indifference or insult, a nation turns its back on progress and can be restored only by the terrible lessons of catastrophe. God needs to be back in the public square. We need to do what's right and moral. We need to live by the Constitution. That's why I keep it in my pocket.
So Brian, you have 1 minute to share any remarks you'd like to share with the state delegates here.
Good to have you here. I'm a little frazzled because I've been driving like a maniac trying to get here. But anyway, nice to see you. Nice to be here. Thank you for your service to America. And if I may say, the thing that I think is so significant right now is that we're in a battle right now as to whether or not you are going to be able to select your representatives. In my opinion, maybe I'm the only one here that thinks that the voting is a little unsure. The FEC chair said the 2020 election, he wasn't sure that it was legitimate. And there's some other people who think that. I think that. So if there's anyone who can make a difference It's back to the people as to whether or not we're going to have elections that are not electronic at the convention. There will be electronic voting unless you can stop it. Thank you very much.
If you asked me a year ago if I was running, no. Wasn't on my mind, not on the mind of my wife. But you know, 5.5 years ago, Mitt Romney came here and he said, elect me as your next senator, I'm going to fight for you every day, balanced budget, end illegal immigration, stop federal spending overreach, confirm conservative justices. Not his record. I'd had enough. And then when I was asked to chair the Salt Lake County GOP organizing convention last March, every other member of the federal delegation shows up. Mitt Romney says, I'll yield my time. To the 1,200 delegates, that was it for me. I said, enough is enough. Utah deserves another true constitutional conservative, another Mike Lee. I've had no equivocation, no problem saying who I would align myself more with. It's for Senator Lee. We need that. We need that in Washington. That's why I've gone out and sought the endorsements that I have with Senator Tuberville, with Kerry Lake, with Rick Grinnell, Kash Patel, Mark Levin, Charlie Kirk, who will be coming out here April 23rd to do an event for us. Look, we've got to be able to get back there and work as America First constitutional conservatives. I'm going to add that to that group of 18 right now. We got to get to 25 plus. So we've got actually the majority within our own caucus. It's the establishment that's the problem. We have to have somebody who's demonstrated that ability to stand up to it, and I've done that. This was typified in my career in business, and also with respect to my time as mayor. Go to TrentStaggs.com, please. As a convention-only candidate, again, I'm asking for your support. Thank you so much.
One of the things that's distasteful to me about politics is how negative it can be. But today, I'm leaving this meeting feeling very edified, and I hope you do too. In Congress, I think we have too many, I'm going to steal a line here, we have too many show ponies, not enough workhorses. And I think that today you've seen, I hope that this gives you hope that we have some good options to send back some workhorses to Congress. Choice is good in America. Choice is our strength, meritocracy, the ability to compete, to improve ourselves, to elect our leaders, to have some choices. You've got some tough choices ahead of you. I know you'll do a good job with it. As we head to convention, I'd appreciate your support. I believe that the American dream has worked for me. To be able to go from a coal miner's grandson, to getting a great education, to start a business, to start a family, and I want that to endure. I want my kids to know that this is a special nation, that it was inspired when it was set up, that it's guided by inspired documents. I want that narrative to continue. It's under threat. It's not a guaranteed narrative, and we need to protect it. And I'll work hard to protect it because it's worked for me. I put it into effect and it's worked, and I know it will continue to work as we live and abide by those principles.
Well, we've been asked a lot of questions up here. I have a question for you. Is your vote for sale? But are some of you considering how much I'm offering for your vote? Is that why you didn't reply? I want you to reply firmly, as if you're being judged by God. Is your vote for sale? No. No, it's not. And, you know what? SB 54 has been terrible. First, it kept us from keeping out a candidate that we no longer wanted to represent us, like Bob Bennett. That was his original intent. Second, it divided the votes. So the conservative vote is divided, and if it goes on like this, the least likely is to win. But the third one is it's put a financial barrier. I tried to convince Phil Lyman not to go with signature gathering, but he said, well, we made his decision as a team. And he tried to do it through volunteers, and guess what? It's impossible. Nobody who's ever gone through SB 54 has done it through volunteers. So I urge you not to vote for any people that will be in the primary anyhow, but to vote for convention-only candidates. You haven't heard much from me trying to get you to vote for me, because what I've been doing is talking to convention-only candidates to try and get them to join the movement, and half of them have. They said, we will take up SB 54 to the Supreme Court if you vote for us at convention. And we're facing dozens or half a dozen people instead of just one other opponent. So that's I urge you to do on April 27th.
Thank you, Jeremy. So please join me in giving these folks a round of applause. Very much appreciate all of you state delegates being here. All of you candidates, thank you for the time. A couple of things that I would stress for you. There's two things that I want you to keep front and center on your mind. First off, the United States Constitution. Second off, the Republican Party platform. Those in tandem together and fidelity to those two things will prepare you to represent the people out here who deserve you to go back to Washington, D.C. and be who you told us you would be. That is what we ask from you as your potential constituents. Final thing I was asked to mention, to the room just to the south, if you go out into the foyer, there is another kind of space. Evidently, I haven't seen it, but it exists. You candidates are welcome to go there and mingle if there's any additional follow-up questions from any of you state delegates. But do keep in mind there's also going to be an Attorney General's component and forum that will be happening immediately, moderated by our dear Gail Ruzicka. So again, state delegates, thanks for all you do. Look forward to seeing you on April 27th.